Hi, everybody, and welcome. This is another Pastor Carla PSA. I know that there's a lot of confusion because the CDC recently changed some rules about how long you have to isolate, how long you have to quarantine, how long you have to isolate if you're exposed, or quarantine if you're exposed to somebody. And those that are vaccinated and boosted have slightly different rules. Basically, if you test positive, you ought to be isolating. And isolating means, as much as possible, you're not around the other people in your house, even. So it's not just staying home. Quarantining would be staying home. Isolating means getting away from all the people that you might have any contact with at home. Generally, at this point, the CDC is giving recommendation of isolating for 5 days. And 5 days after either you test positive or you know you have symptoms that have started. A lot of the testing these days is taking a long time to get results, so it's really, really hard. If you have been exposed to COVID, like if you've been around somebody that you know tested positive and you were around them for a length of time, or you had masks off and you were around for a while, those are very likely exposures. Especially the Omicron variant is extremely contagious, so it doesn't take as much time for you to build up the viral load in your body. So if you've been exposed, but you don't yet have the results or you don't yet have a positive test, you still should probably quarantine. If you can. Again, there's some rules that are a little different for those that are vaccinated and boosted, both. But ultimately, you want to make sure you're kind of watching for symptoms. You're watching for symptoms that could develop. In my case, and I shared this with the church when it happened, I had a COVID exposure in my home, and then shortly after that, I began to have new cold symptoms. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, one night I'm sneezing, my nose is running, and it just came out of the blue. And it was the right number of days after the COVID exposure that it was very likely COVID. At that moment, regardless of what my test said, I had an at-home test the night before that actually said negative, but then the day of those symptoms, I did get a PCR test, which is more sensitive. And I got a PCR test, and the PCR test tested positive. But I didn't get my results from that PCR test for almost 5 days. During those 5 days, I isolated because I was pretty clear that I had been exposed to COVID and I was having symptoms that looked like COVID. Now, they really were more like just a cold. I'm thankful that they weren't bad, and that's probably because I am vaccinated and boosted. I don't encourage people to take it lightly, but I do say it was important for me to take it seriously in that moment and assume that it was COVID. Because if I had not assumed it was COVID, or if I had sat around and waited until my results came in, I could have infected every person that came to church that first week. And I wouldn't have wanted to do that. I wouldn't have been intending to do that. And yet, if I didn't take seriously the symptoms that I had and the COVID exposure that already had happened, I would have missed the signs that I needed to be away from people. So typically, you isolate for 5 days, and then if you can isolate for another 5, it's probably the best practices to do that. The CDC has changed the way that they talk about it. They encourage you to quarantine during that time, and if you really have to go be around people, wear a very well-fitting mask. Again, that's where my other PSA of double masking comes in and might be helpful. Hope you have a great day, stay safe, and be warm these days.